Alrighty, everyone. Thomas Rhett has released his sixth studio album, Where We Started, and it is time to talk about it. It was around this time last year Thomas dropped his fifth album, Country Again Side A, an album I was pretty positive towards and really got behind given the circumstances surrounding its release. Over the course of his career, Thomas had slowly been leaning more and more into the pop realm, all the while keeping at least his pinky toe in the country pool so he could maintain his spot as one of the top dogs in the mainstream sphere. And that was one of the reasons I was never a huge Thomas Rhett supporter. It seemed like he was profiting off the genre more than he was actually contributing to it. It's not that I hate pop music or think pop country has no right to exist. In fact, I actually don't mind some of his poppier cuts. It's just personally, I like when people call things as they are, and in Thomas's case, it was just getting a little out of hand, especially when you're dropping stuff like VHS. But then, of course, the pandemic hit, and while stuck at home, it seemed like Thomas began falling in love with his roots all over again, posting countless videos of him performing new unreleased songs, a lot of which were sounding much more genuine, much more close to home, generally just more engaging and worthwhile than mostly anything on Centerpoint Road. So then when his album Country Again Side A was announced, naturally, I got excited to see where it would go and was left quite impressed, even charmed. Lyrically, the songs felt much more heartfelt and meaningful, with more focus on his family, his upbringing, and his faith, which granted aren't necessarily new subjects for Thomas to address, but he was going about them in a much more sincere way. At least as far as spiritual songs go, I think we can all agree you heard absolutely gritty's all over Look What God Gave Her's Face. Even the fun moments just hit so much harder since they weren't trying to fit a radio-friendly template. You can look to songs like Blame It on a Back Road or Growing Up. So naturally, given how much I enjoyed Country Again Side A, you can imagine my delight when I found out a Side B would be coming the following year. It seemed like Thomas was truly dedicated to advancing his craft, even if it didn't guarantee him a spot as the poster boy of country music. But then he dropped Redneck Be Like, which was and still is one of the worst attempts at trying to recreate the success of Walker Hayes' controversial but incredibly successful Fancy Like. And then in November, he hit us with the incredibly dull Slowdown Summer, which sounds like a leftover from the Centerpoint Road era that got scrapped to allow room for Remember You Young. Sonically, it's just a mess of string sections, auto-tune harmonies, bombarding percussion, this awkwardly synthetic sounding piano. It just felt like maybe his team wasn't impressed with the album sales, so they pulled out all the stops to try and land a radio hit. Then finally, closer to the end of last year, Thomas hit us with an album announcement, but it was much different than myself and I think a lot of us in the community were expecting. He confirmed Country Again Side A would be coming at us later in 2022, but not before an intermissive surprise album, the one we're here to discuss today, Where We Started. Immediately, red flags began flying high in my mind because it was pretty easy to see what was going on here. The numerical performance of Country Again Side A clearly didn't satisfy either his label or his expectations or both. So before they dropped another installment that would likely produce similar numbers, let's drop a much more radio/pop friendly album that should top a chart or two based on previous tried and tested formulas. Then we'll drop the interesting music that we think isn't going to perform as well. From a business standpoint, I understand. It makes perfect sense if you're looking at this like a business. But from an artistic standpoint, from my standpoint as a fan who just wants music that makes me think, thoughtful ideas I can appreciate, the whole move just seems really cheap. But beyond that, just zooming in on the album itself and not its outside significance, it's not a strategy I would expect to cultivate very unique or worthwhile music. But then, throughout the first quarter of 2022, Thomas began putting out teasers for this upcoming album, and I was really digging them. Maybe Church Boots wasn't the best thing I've ever heard, but then you got stuff like Angels, Death Row, both of which I think very highly of. Even Us Someday, sure it's patchy, but I liked what it was going for. All of a sudden, I decided I wasn't going to write this album off. Maybe it was going to be surprisingly good, and even after listening to the opener, The Hill, I was ready for another solid body of work, but after a few listens, I was sort of just left scratching my head, generally unsure what to make of it, because while there still are some genuinely great tracks on here, they wind up being few and far between, and what further soured my first experience was the fact that he put out all the best songs before the album came out, so on April 1st when the whole thing became available, other than the opener The Hill, the rest of the album just felt super underwhelming, which sucks because like I said, it starts off so strong with The Hill, a gorgeous dedication to his wife that uses a lot of battle metaphors before bringing it all back together, saying, not every battle's worth it, he's gone too far in some instances, but fighting for his wife is a hill he's willing to die on. And then we get to Church Boots, which like I said, I don't necessarily mind, but it's quite the jarring mood change, just one song into a record. But what's way worse is the two tracks that follow, Bass Pro Hat and Anything Cold, which for my money are the two worst tracks on the whole album. Bass Pro Hat is this nauseatingly overblown pop country song that makes me want to go listen to some white noise to regain my composure. It's like the audible equivalent of just strobing someone with a floodlight. It sounds like a cut from the latest Florida Georgia Line album, only it's juiced up like Alex Rodriguez in the early 2000s. A whining melody in the chorus, little to no lyrical substance at all. In all honesty, I'd rather just stub my toe repeatedly for 2 minutes and 56 seconds. But don't worry, because Flying In to Save You is the fourth track, Anything Cold, which despite not upping any antes lyrically, it's thankfully lighter than Bass Pro Hat, but it's still just an over-glorified piece of synthetic beach music. And then we get Angels. Bro, how are we gonna go from Bass Pro Hat and Anything Cold to Angels? Who sequenced this album? I might honestly start a petition to get Angels added to Country Again Side B, because such a great song doesn't deserve to be surrounded by these hollow filler tracks. You know what, if Angels isn't switched on to Country Again Side B, I will start a change.org petition because I'm just an activist like that. Thankfully though, once you make it through the first leg of this record, it begins to smooth itself out. Even if the songs aren't showstoppers or emotional masterpieces, I can at least appreciate the energy and what they were going for. Beer Can't Fix is my bad. Half of Me is a fun summer banger, not reinventing the wheel by any means. In fact, as I alluded to earlier, it's honestly just providing the same wheel we got on his 2019 single Beer Can't Fix with John Party. But I'd still be lying if I said this wasn't a catchy song with some great energy. I think Riley fits perfectly onto this song. The two of them are a great package deal. And overall, I do like it even if it isn't knocking my socks off. I actually think Bring the Bar is a good song, but like a lot of this record, it's just buried under this unnecessary blanket of percussion and other elements. In general, it's just too busy, but I think it has a solid groove. I can't salsa, but this song makes me feel like I can. It's got a nasty bass line, lots of movement, but it's just weighed down by the production. Buried is the word that keeps coming to mind. Lyrically, even if it's a little vague across the board, I like the whole idea of, we don't need to go out, I can bring the bar to you. We can have a good time without all the flashing lights and big crowds. It's very up Thomas's alley, but the final product just feels pretty diluted and a little lost. Ernest aided in the creation of the 8th track Paradise, and my oh my, can you hear his influence? Not that that's a bad thing. I think the song is alright, but it's another one of these tracks that just sort of fades out of memory once I finish listening to the album. After all, it's not bringing anything we haven't heard on any of the numerous summer love tunes found across this record. It's just alright. Then the album closes just like it starts. Pretty rocky, except for Mama's Front Door, which is one I was ecstatic to see was getting released. It was easily one of my favorites Thomas debuted during the quarantine period. Just such a heartwarming track about the passing of time and how his wife's Mama's Front Door hasn't changed throughout the years, but the events surrounding it have, and how his life keeps changing every time he shows up at her Mama's front door. When he was younger, he was a nervous kid knocking to take her out on a date. As they got older, it was where he got her dad's blessing to propose, and then it closes with this really sweet image of Thomas having to knock with his knees because he's got kids clinging all over him. The charm is only matched by the production, which thankfully stays out of the way for the most part. Could it be a little lighter? Yes, easily, but it's not nearly as overdone as a lot of the record, and it's not glossed up to the point where it stains the tune. As for the rest of the songs, I feel pretty similarly to them as I do Paradise. They're fun little pop country tracks that do the job, but not with flying colors. Simple as a song features a vocal chop sample, which is something I myself can't recall hearing since Sam Hunt did it with Hard to Forget in early 2020. Song's got a groove, it's a jam, but am I left craving more? No, not really. Same applies for Somebody Like Me, which is this bubbly, bluesy pop country cut that I definitely prefer to some of the other tracks in this vein. The slight hints of R&B go down a lot smoother than some of the more stark implementations of pop we've gotten up until this point. Both Us Someday and Where We Started, I think, have some cool concepts structurally, but neither come off as finished as I think they could have. Us Someday needed more, and Where We Started needed less. Us Someday, while I like the jolly strings running throughout, it does run a little thin as far as structure goes, and in general, it just feels like it needed a little more care in the writing department. But then on the flip side, Where We Started sounds like a music teacher just adding sounds to a track to give his students an idea of what the different instruments and effects sound like. I think if you strip away the bulk of the trappy percussion, implement more of a gradual build, and use the various strings to create some strength, I think you could have a real solid power ballad here between Thomas and Katie. I love the little breakdown in the chorus when it goes, and you say you don't know how far we're gonna go, just looking down road and think about where we started. That stutter in the beat is just begging for a super climactic moment, and while it does get that to a degree in the final chorus, the whole thing just feels a little constricted under the percussion, like it's operating in a cage, and the fact that the percussion is there straight from the get-go makes the climax less impactful in my opinion, because there wasn't much of a build leading up to it. We've had all systems going since the first beat of the song. Yeah, overall, like I said, this album's just a bit of a head scratcher. I think there's some great moments, I think there's some brutal throwaways, I think there's a lot of stuff here that could have been tidied up and presented in a much more cohesive manner, but as it stands, where we started is just a bit too messy for my liking, and also hearing the stuff Thomas is capable of via Country Again Side A, it only makes his return to songs like Bass Pro Hat more disappointing. I still remain optimistic and excited for Country Again Side B when it drops later this year, but I guess in order to get there we had to trudge through this album first. And hey, maybe it'll make Country Again Side B that much more rewarding, because not only did we have to wait for it, but like I said, we had to push past this album first to get there. Rating-wise, I'm not feeling great. I'm thinking a high 4, like a 4.8, just shy of that midpoint. Anyways, that's all I've got for you guys today. Be sure to let me know what you thought of this album in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, a like really does help the channel out. If you're new, maybe consider subscribing for more country music content. Links to my Discord and podcast are all down below in the description. New podcast episode coming this Saturday. My new Instagram account will be going live in the next few days thanks to the great people that dedicate their time to hacking accounts for the sole purpose of deactivating them. At least Jesus still loves y'all. Anyways, I'm rambling. Until next time, I hope y'all have a fantastic day.